is my pleasure and honor to welcome to Bach Talk my friend of over 40 years, isn't it, Paul? Is it 40 years? Paul Orgel,
Right,
uh,
right.
performer and professor at the University of Vermont at Burlington. And we've known each other since we were college roommates at New England Conservatory. And now here we are, nigh these many years later. And Paul happens to have had a great concentration on book two of the Well-Tempered Clavier while I was doing my own immersion. And so it's been we've been in touch, and Paul's been so supportive of my performances and interpretations, and I've enjoyed listening to his and watching his as well. And we'll get to see one of them later on in our talk. But I just want to first of all welcome my dear friend Paul Orgel.
Thanks so much. It's great. Thanks. Mm.
So, Paul, the first thing I wanted to ask you has to do with the idea of the difference between book two and book one. You know, the 20 years apart,
Mhm.
and Trevor Pinnock recently recorded and released his version of book two on the harpsichord. And he was doing a promo video, and I thought it was interesting that he talked about book two as the book that Bach had written for himself,
Mhm.
and as book one is really quite a collection of pieces, some of which began as kind of notebook pieces for Wilhelm Friedman Bach, and very elementary. And book two, of course, is a different animal altogether. So
Right.
tell me, first of all, I want to hear about your growing up with Bach. I mean, I only did maybe a handful of the Preludes and Fugues before I got into college. I mean, was
Yeah.
your experience with Bach a little bit more comprehensive in childhood, or how did you
Yes and
grow
no. You learn in childhood that there's a sequence of Bach works that's, at least I was told, traditional. The Anna Magdalena notebook pieces, which everybody has to do. Then I suppose the little, what are called the little preludes. And then you move to the inventions, and then I guess book one. And I remember at a certain point, one of my teachers saying, I think we can skip the inventions. We're going to move right to book one. And I was so flattered. I thought, that's great. I think that made sense, actually. And so I've hardly played any of the inventions. I mean, I've taught them and, gone over them, but they're actually fairly hard, the inventions. I mean, they're demanding. Um, so book one was what teachers give you. Book two is not really mentioned when you're young. I don't know anyone that was exposed to book two. Although I've sort of started to choose from book two. I did a number of Preludes and Fugues of book one in high school, and was very into Bach. I was very loved Bach at that time in a way that I didn't subsequently so much. I remember very clearly when I went away to Oberlin, I received a gift certificate to Padelson's, and I went and bought three, extravagant volumes that probably cost 250 or something. And one was book two, Henley edition, but an older Henley that I still think is better than some of the newer ones. Also Brahms intermezzos and Schumann complete works volume four, it was all stuff I hadn't played before.
up?
So I had Bach, and I think part of the appeal of book two was the unknownness of it. I mean, we'd gone through book one, and I think everyone does, say, the C minor, or I think the B flat, traditional ones to start, and some of the others. And I actually learned the C sharp minor and the B minor when I was in high school, because clearly those are the best ones.
Yes.
At least the B minor is the best one. Um, but so then there was this thing of book two, and I was very into Bach at that time. I thought he was going to be a big presence in my life, which turned out not to be so much. And I remember they have a thing at Oberlin called winter term, where you do a special project over January. And so I stayed there to do something. Bach wasn't my project, but I had the idea that I would start to learn book two. And I borrowed, so it was my freshman or sophomore year, I borrowed a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and somehow learned the first eight of book two in this way that you and I have done later in life, like just getting really into it, moving one to the next, being compelled to go on. Um, And so I remember I played the first eight, and I didn't have lessons. My teacher wasn't that interested in this, I don't think, and I believe I memorized it and recorded it, and so that was that. And I remember one day I was in my room listening to the recording of it, and these people that these classmates or older musicians that I really looked up to, who were really eccentric. Ira Brous he became a musicologist at Hart School, just a brilliant musician, and he had on his door, this is the Max Reger Institute. Like his favorite composer was Max Reger. I mean, and so we all took that really seriously. And there is a Max Reger Institute in Germany. And he came by and said, "Oh, that sounds so good. It sounds just like their favorite pianist, Jorg Damus. You sound just like Jorg Damus, who's the most neutral player of Bach I think I've ever heard. I mean, it's just like a printout of notes and rhythms, and nothing else." Um, so, well, I think back on that, and I think, well, I learned it, and at a certain level, I think I even memorized it. But there was absolutely nothing going on there except like, you getting through it. So that was book two, and then I didn't deal with it really again for many decades, and I found that my interests and affinities really weren't with Bach much at all. And I noted that, I taught it and I played some, but it didn't have the same attraction for me at all, as it did in high school. And I thought, I wonder if I could ever get that back. And then it really didn't come back until the pandemic. I mean, and I was like, yeah, what about book two? And the miracle is you retain stuff that you learned when you were so young. So I could kind of play those first eight, and then I was like, I'm going to learn the rest of these. And then it was just intoxicating, and then sometime later I learned, well, you were doing an even bigger project of both books, and I mean, your chronicle of it really, I could relate to very much. Just the obsession and the addiction. It's just physically addicting to work on them, and musically mind expanding in every way. You had asked about book two being more personal, or I guess, and less more private, less public, maybe, or less a teaching element to it. And I think that's true, actually. It doesn't invite you in quite as easily, maybe, because the pieces are longer. There are fewer pieces that set up a kind of motor rhythm throughout the whole work. So I think it's a little more interior in some way. Also, it's long enough that it really doesn't work for a concert. I don't think for a full, and book one can just about work for a program, for a good audience. Book two, it's like, well, you and I have talked about this. Like, what do you do with these pieces once in terms of performance? That's another issue.
Well, the thing about
It's
book two, for me, that's so amazing is, yeah, you don't see them as a sequence of pieces. It's like you get to the D major and it's gemütlich enough and really convivial, but it's a major piece. It's not just some.
right,
It's a sonata movement. It's it's
right.
it's a full sonata movement with repeats.
Hmm.
And so it's really I so I blanch at the idea of doing book two as one, but I still believe that there's great worth in the experience of that. I mean, do you know, Paul, what the anecdote was? Chopin had some daily habit with the well-tempered clavier. Whether did he play six every morning, or do you know what it was? I
I
forget.
don't remember specifically what his routine was, but he revered it, and he really ignored a huge amount of music as a teacher as well. I think he taught this, fanatically, and then I think he admired Mozart, had no interest in Beethoven, no interest in his contemporaries, Mendelssohn, Schumann, so on. I mean, he really just zeroed in on specifically well-tempered clavier, probably transposing them into other keys, I would imagine. Um, you know, yeah, he was very involved with it, and
Yes.
obviously a huge influence on him. mean that's no, well known, but if you look at Chopin's composing style, it's not just on the surface involved with Bach. It's involved with it in the deepest way.
I've come to think that Bach had his influence from Chopin as well. I've always maintained that there's no such thing as a downbeat in Chopin. You know, I
Mm,
mean, that the downbeat is always a springboard in Chopin.
mm,
I
mm-hmm,
was once playing the F minor concerto with a student orchestra up in Minnesota, way upstate,
mm-hmm.
and I said, the only downbeat you should mark it. The only downbeat in this piece is in bar 243, and that was the last bar of the first movement. Because
Right, right.
idea, and particularly if you're an orchestra and you're
Well,
just sitting there waiting to come in on time,
yeah.
there's no feeling of this as a springboard. And since then, especially with the Bach, I've now come to realize that, well, look at the E flat minor prelude. You know, I realize if we think orchestrally, it's a lute duo or something. So
Mm-hmm,
this is really a strum, and I spend so much time trying to make the right attack, but essentially we're sinking in, and what we have to do is make a Chopin downbeat of it, and just
mm-hmm,
everything has to be lifted.
mm-hmm,
And once I caught into that idea, I was just teaching the C minor partita, and that has to have an upward
yes,
trajectory. And
yes.
how do you do?
I was just looking at that piece, which I did study when I was young, and thinking about that introduction and how at that time the approach was to really attack those things forzando and get something very aggressive, and how it's really not that at all. It's a releasing of some sort of sound, not
Yes.
even loud, some of it. But then again, we like, well, what does one do with that? I had a totally different idea about it now than I used to when I was young. Slower and more generous, and no attacks. And I mean,
Yes.
it's just funny how this happens with this music. Yeah.
And I was going to say one more thing about book two, which is to say that yes, honey, yes. Yeah. What do you want? Oh, you want to go outside. If you want to go outside, you can go outside, but
Mhm.
you can't interrupt me. You want a snack? All right, I'll be right back. She is so totally the boss of me.
Oh, I know.
It's just better. I mean, if she's asking you for something, it's probably
Hmm.
for a good reason.
Hmm. Well, and you understand it. Yeah, it's great.
I always feel much better when I've finally gotten the memo about something from her. You know.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
but book two falls into that realm of late pieces that
Hmm.
were, ultimate, existential puzzles for Bach. The art of the fugue, the musical offering, which is, not orchestrated for anything, but is
Right,
just
right.
a fantastic, solution to this great, contrapuntal puzzle. Book two definitely qualifies as that as late period stuff for which he composed these himself. These were not, jobs. These were
Right, right.
the
But
musical
there is,
offering was an excuse for a job, but
yeah.
other than that, these are all for himself
Mm.
testaments.
There is the many people have noted this when you come to the keys in book two, that there's a reaction to whatever he had done in book one. In other words, to differentiate, like, well, I did that in C major in book one, so I'm going to do nothing like that in book two. I mean, I find this as or even the choice of E flat minor book one, D sharp minor book two. He's so inventive with everything. He really doesn't repeat. The B minor, being the serious climax of book one, then the B minor being kind of tossed off in book two. He's very aware of those things, I think. You
I
know.
just shared my last video of the 48, the B minor from book
Oh,
two,
uh-huh. Yeah.
and I note in the description that, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, the B minor in book one really has a summative sort of nature about
Very
it.
important. Yeah.
And it would seem to me, and I'm sure you would agree, the B flat minor in book two has that place in book two.
Right. Right. Right.
but the B minor of Book Two reminds me, and I'm sure you may find this true, the quadlibet of the Goldberg Variations, which is again a sort of an offhand. I mean, basically, a rude song, to send
Right,
off
right,
the
right,
variation,
right.
thumbing your nose at it. And this B minor in Book Two definitely has that quality, I think.
Well, also the observation that I'm sure many people have made, but I've been amazed by this over the years, is that we look at major and minor as happy and sad, but Bach is maybe the one composer who can write minor that's not particularly sad.
Mhm.
That his minor is kind of festive, and
Yes.
in that case, I mean, it really works. It's not, it can't be seen as a serious sad utterance, that piece.
I
It's like,
think I though the thing that I found, and I realized this morning more clearly and more evidentially, uh, we have the 12 tone subject of the fugue from Book One.
right.
The seriousness of the Book One fugue subject and the 12 tone aspect of it, contrasted with this other one, um, they actually still both begin with the same thing. In
Right, right.
but but the minor sixth, of Book Two is a drinking song,
Yeah.
you know, you know, and
But, yeah.
and it's just taking all subtlety out of it. But then at the same time, the first episode has a yeah this has a nice sort of chromatic creep. So I'm not sure if that covers 12 notes, but this does.
Mhm. Mhm.
Watch this. So in those four measures, all 12 tones are covered.
Mm.
And just make sure you get the joke, it's the last thing he does.
Yeah,
And he says finally a hemiola that actually does work. Because I maintain that this whole subject is a sort of a hemiola inside of two bars. I think the duple is actually it's a hemiola without result,
Mhm.
without resolution. Uh,
Yeah, that.
just the one thing I wanted to point about the prelude that I think is also not necessarily as thumb nosing as I first experienced it,
Mm.
is one of the only experiences of the Bach slur. When we have the that one is actually, this one is snare drum, but this one is often slurred. And so I go right from the beginning and have that reflect actually in both tempo and touch, because of
Mhm.
course touch would make no difference if we were playing this on the harpsichord.
This is the one where he gives a tempo too, right? Is this he writes allegro or something? Yeah, it's
Allegro alla breva.
so wonderful. I mean, all of a sudden, yeah, I can write a tempo, after none of these things.
Well,
Uh,
I mean, he had to write the tempo, even when he writes the tempo andante in four for the prelude in Book One. I still see, people, grotesque
and
and
then he
bizarre
does in
people.
book one. That's right. Yeah,
I
yeah.
was very curious to hear your journey and your decision interpretively. I really love, and we'll watch now, your F sharp major prelude and fugue from Book Two. Paul, that's so magnificent, and I'm so glad we got to share it with
Well,
everybody.
thank you.
I'm very, very curious how you arrived at your treatment of really a duality of tempo within the prelude.
I think is a certain kind of confidence to look at a piece and say, well, there are two strains here. There's the dotted section, and then there's the more flowing, even section. It's a matter of instinct, and this has a lot to do with maturing. I think as a pianist, that what I really love about that, or to take my time with the dotted, the dotted opening of the prelude is just sublime, especially if you play it slowly. It's very vocal and just so touching. And then, but do I want to play that way throughout? Well, not really. And it's something you've obviously done hugely in your playing, following one's instinct, letting some parts move according to it, not being burdened by the idea that you must put a metronome to this, that has to be tied together. Um, that's something I don't think I could have done earlier in life. I mean, I think our first half of our time as pianists, those of us who are not hugely confident, um, has to do with trying to get things right. And trying to get things right tends to mean, well, get your tempo and stick to it because that's what's intended in the music. So so it's liberating, and it sounds like an easy thing to do. The problem is also, if you're very self-conscious as a player, as I am, does something come across as self-indulgent or not? And then that's a danger. I mean, we were both under the spell of a teacher in Boston that I would say would have had that problem. Well, that playing that
What
comes across
mindset?
as inspired and different and brilliant often doesn't wear very well. You hear Beethoven sonatas, and then all of a sudden, why is he hesitating there? I mean, that seemed really nice at the time, but one doesn't want to hear it. And so, the the area of music that lends itself the most to this kind of indulgence has to do with timing and tempo, rubato, and so on. And we all grew up thinking that the earlier composers didn't really make use of rubato, and that was a romantic innovation. I think everyone's changed to some extent about this. I once read somewhere, memorably, that the great change of the classical period from the Baroque period was that a movement would have a first theme and then a contrasting second theme, and that doesn't exist in the Baroque. And that's the great innovation of sonata form. In other words, the Baroque is about the theory of affect, where each movement is one mood. I am much more comfortable in the classical period than the Baroque. I mean, my orientation as a musician was started out with Mozart opera basically. I mean, so so this is what I really feel, and so then I think again it's like, well, is that maybe something I could develop in some Bach as well? I mean, are there contrasting feelings in this piece? So I think some of it comes from that and in that prelude.
Very well
Does it
put.
correspond to things that you've felt? I'm sure it does, or that you would say somewhat differently, or
Oh, absolutely. No, you've really hit the nail on the head quite eloquently, Paul. I believe that. It's funny, people just have a different frame of reference entirely, even if they want to entertain the possibility of alternate views. I was backstage and listening to students perform this or that prelude and fugue, and there would be other, huddled pianists waiting to go on, or just, supporting their friends back there, and they'd come talk to you. Oh well, what did you think of the tempo of his fugue? I said, I said, what tempo? What, what are we talking about? Why are we talking about tempo? And why is that
yeah.
answer definitive in terms of what we think of the whole performance? Really? Is that the only takeaway that we can go, is like, oh, well, it was the wrong tempo for the theme. So,
Well, I understand that though. I mean, don't you understand, having had that notion for years and years? I mean, like, the key to something is the right tempo, and if it's two metronome marks different, it's not quite right, and it's I mean,
Oh,
remember,
we
remember
both grew up in thrall as well. You less so to Ben Zander, who was
well, yes, I just thought of him. I mean, the tempo is the key to the magic garden. That was his quote, I
yes,
believe. And it's all the tempo. And if you find the tempo, then he had one other idea which had to do with rubato. Then you were all set. I mean, that was it. Wonderful, admirable things, and good things to talk to, young students starting out about. I mean, he had a lot to offer, but
response has been to try and make a pragmatic way in which we can gain the same amount of freedom and also gain immeasurably in terms of the conveyance and communication of what we have divined as the composer's intention, not only based on the notes of the score, but how he would have played it on his own instruments.
yeah, I mean, that's tricky, is to try to say that we're playing it the way we think he would have played it. I don't know that we can say that. I
We
mean, I
can't,
think
we can't,
this,
we can't say
and,
that, but
and yeah,
if we acknowledge tiny uh, incremental things like the existence of notes under a slur, that would mean something technically specific and agogically specific. These would be notes not connected to either before or after, their predecessors.
well, to
Um,
get to, I mean, the very essence of Bach, when I teach it, what makes it hard and what makes people not really like it a lot is that there are no rests. I mean, there are very few rests or stopping or retarding. So it has the impression of running on, and what one does at a deeper level is find all kinds of punctuation and division in it. But that's the task of interpreting it. And then how far do you go with it? I mean, that's what I think we both find uh, so interesting. And there's so many answers to that too. It does present this situation, which is pretty unique, actually.
it is.
Again, classical period with its cadences and with its divisions and things is easier for me.
I think it goes even deeper. I think we're actually cued into sort of visual clues, like a continue. Can you see my score here?
Yes, yeah, uh-huh.
So that we're looking at this as a continuum, and that's kind of how we respond to it. And what I've been trying to work on is divining what is the gesture. And my latest Chopin inspiration means that this goes into the air. It is not achieved. It is
Right.
it is an afterthought. And also because I can never leave two notes unscathed. If I if I if I connect these are not connected. So there are lots of inflections just even within that point that kind of go against the visual idea, right? But
Right.
there's nothing telling us that. And the other most important thing in your performance as well is the idea of, as you say, there are all these long notes and no rests until we decide that, well, this could as well be, a pizzicato cello, and he or
Right.
she would be fulfilling the contract of that dotted note, but it would just be ringing that long.
Of course, what you're talking about, though, has introduces another aspect of what you've done and what anyone does who's playing an instrument, the qualities of the instrument. So I haven't explored it on other instruments the way you have, but the piano tells you to do certain things. I mean, there are assumptions about playing the piano, which is that line sounds really nice legato.
Mhm.
And the performance you heard, I play in a very resonant hall, overly resonant, but it's quite seductive, actually. I mean, it
Well,
gives
it's a
you,
beautiful. If you make a
it,
beautiful sound, and it's a beautiful recording in a beautiful hall.
yeah, yeah. What the hall is very bright. So any kind of sustaining that you want to do is very easy. And I'm playing on the piano. But that kind of articulation that you're doing, you've explored on the piano tech program with so many instruments. And I just have to say, I love that about your project is the choice of instruments and and you use the word term postmodern for your approach. I think that's an aspect. Is that I thought, oh, Chris is going to do a like a historically correct thing. He's going to use harpsichords. I mean, I guess the well tempered is supposedly for harpsichord, clavichord, or organ. Is that right?
That's well, it was completely undesignated, and
But
there's
on,
all
but
scholarship
we think
designated
those are
instruments. I mean, there's obviously a pedal harpsichord somewhere in there. We
yeah,
think there was actually a precursor or an early fortepiano that he might have written one of these for. All conjecture.
really, really. I thought he only came upon a piano in like the last day of his life or something. I mean, do you know that story? It was at the court of Frederick the Great. It was around. Someone brought him a piano and to try, and he supposedly was very positive about it. So, uh, but but what you've done, I think, in a lot of your choices are forte pianos of a period later than Bach, but not certainly not in modern period. But to hear it, well, that's another perspective. I mean, like keyboard instruments that were evolving somewhat later, but still, with musicians who would have known Bach's time.
Well,
I
the way I portray it now, knowing that 2022 is the tricentennial of Book One's publication, is that we are celebrating 300 years since the publication of the Well-Tempered Clavier, with 300 years of keyboard evolution. Because there
right,
are
right,
preludes that I need to play on a modern. This is the one I play on the Bechstein. I play. I think I play the late A major in Book Two on a Petrov. You know, so no, there is 300 years
yeah.
of keyboard
So,
in.
but what you're saying there is that this is all abstract, and it really is designed for no particular sonority or instrument. I mean, what you were saying about the notation of the 16th notes, though, has to be influenced by what is possible, uh, or what maybe I think we both practiced them on a harpsichord sample from Casio, which is so pleasing. And but I think this was another exercise that I did was to learn them all on so-called on harpsichord and hear what they do, and then that influences what your choices are going to be for piano. And it doesn't necessarily make them more non-legato, which is the sort of the cliche about the harpsichord. The harpsichord actually rings and creates sustaining, I think, and obviously timing that one might get from the harpsichord, which doesn't do things that the piano does. What you were doing with that very detailed articulation of what would seem like a really simple, just flowing line, really brings to mind what one learns from the other sonorities from the harpsichord, or I suppose clavichord. Do you do clavichord? Or
I
some?
I I have there is a piano tech clavichord. I
Yeah,
have it, but it doesn't have the ability to vibrate the keys.
yeah,
So that would really be that would be the great thing,
that
and
would
I
be
would have
something. Yeah.
incorporated it otherwise. Because actually, I think both of our favorite recording of the Well-Tempered Clavier is by Ralph Kirkpatrick on clavichord, is it not?
Right, 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 right.
The
Yeah,
best.
that's a good one. And there's so many other ones that I've actually like thrown away. I mean, it's it gets very annoying.
I can only listen to yours, Paul. Sorry.
No, no. I mean, sometimes, yeah. Who do I listen to? I mean, I used to love Schiff, and now I find him kind of straitjacketed in a way. But he's the great interpreter now, I guess.
As someone who has a life in academia, memorization is part of the course, and I came to the point in my life where I was dealing with so much music there was just
Right.
it was impossible to do that,
Right.
and I've always felt a little guilty about it, and then when I happened on this project, it was partly because I wanted to make it known that I knew these pieces, but that I hadn't memorized them. And with the depth and detail that I've assigned to these pieces, I mean, I know these pieces
Yeah, I
well.
know. Well, and you could memorize them if you had to.
I could, but I would never
Yeah.
have had the ability to delve that deeply had
Right.
I been so concerned with getting them by memory. You know.
Same. And I mean, I largely. I play a fair amount of music over any year. When I'm playing older pieces that I learned when I was young, I'll get them memorized again because that work is already done. I mean, I know people will say this, newer things, forget it. I'm not memorizing them unless they're sort of a virtuoso piece that just to present it really frees you. I learned some Scriabin etudes and things. I was like, this really has to be memorized because, like, why do you want to turn pages for this when you really need to watch what you're doing? But the Bach, absolutely not. And it's been liberating. I think a lot of us who are older now, the memory is such an arbitrary element. I think there's huge dissent about it. You said academia. We argue, should we require them to memorize? I think it's falling away. It's sort of like colleges not requiring the SATs anymore. I mean, it's changing a bit. There was like the humble statement of Sviatoslav Richter, who could memorize the whole literature basically, and then started using music. As he said, my hearing isn't as good. I just he immediately stopped doing it. As a model. Historically, nobody memorized right until Liszt or the it's always unclear whether it's Liszt or Clara Schumann who said now everybody has to memorize. One of them decreed that this is how it is. And then there was this composer Ducek who was the first to turn the piano sideways on stage
Oh,
because he wanted people to admire his profile. That's why we don't play facing the audience or away from it. But it was kind of a smart move in terms of the
an
opening.
amazing move for the sound for every. I
Right, right,
thought
right.
it was Dusak who did that.
Yeah, apparently,
Well, you
apparently.
you've long been a champion of the Eastern European
Oh,
oeuvre.
yeah, yeah.
And was this in your research of composers, or was this a fact
Oh,
that
I think it's an anecdote, and Harold Schoenberg's a great pianist or something. One of those corny things he wrote in there.
life changing? It's
Then
wonderful.
there was a really annoying quote from Wanda Landowska that it was important with Bach playing, of course, and she was upbraiding someone and said, "Well, you can play Bach your way, but I'm going to play him his way." That was her thing. So presumptuous, really. Funny thing about Wanda Landowska is have you ever heard her piano playing? She recorded a lot of Mozart, and it is the best. I mean, it's nothing like her harpsichord playing. It's free and elegant and inflected. She was Polish. I think there's a Polish sort of Chopin quality. It's really my favorite piano Mozart. It's something to know about.
Amazing,
Really great. I mean, the
amazing.
harpsichord stuff just sounds like, I don't know, an armored tank to me.
Yeah.
I'm sure she had something to offer. I should.
And that was an inauthentic instrument. I mean, that was built for her to her specifications by the Pleyel company, I think.
Well, it was souped up and then recorded primitively. I mean, it's just not very fun.
I love the idea of having her in a racing jacket with all the logos all over it.
Yeah.
Beefed up harpsichord.
Well, you
There's
should check out her Mozart because she phrases and inflects the music in a way that I don't think I've heard anybody do. It's so fantastic. Really.
who was it that said that Bach is a free country?
Mm.
I think it was Shebach who said that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
He
um, to which my reply would be, yeah, but I've got the maps.
was.
It's been wonderful speaking with you. I'm hoping we can
Great.
do this real soon. Would you like
It's
that?
it's great, and thank you again. Thanks for your attention to my recordings, which aren't nearly as considered as yours over so many iterations. And it's I mean, I've tried not to listen to all of yours actually, just because of the influence. But I have been influenced certainly. Yeah,
Oh, thank you. Thank
good.
you. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, take care.